It's the 15th of April 1931, Fort Worth, Texas. The country is in the depths of the worst economic shock that the world has ever seen. The unemployment queues snake around city blocks. Sound familiar? Amongst the heartbreak, the economic havoc, the hungry tummies, a young man dressed in a nice suit, carrying a cane and wearing a hat, which is probably why I like him, starts out on an epic adventure. His name is Plenty Wingo. Yes, Plenty is a real name. And Plenty is heading out to do something that nobody has ever done before. He's planning on walking around the world. But, there's always a but. Plenty's planning to do it not the way that you or I would walk around the world. He's planning on doing it differently. Plenty is planning on doing it backwards. It's an adventure that he hopes will win him fame and fortune in the toughest times that the world has ever known. But will it? And what does this have to do with making you irresistible to employers? We're going to find out, aren't we? I'm Rob Malicki. Thanks for joining me today. Are you ready? Let's get started. Oh, we live? Whoops. Hey, thanks again for joining me. And where are you joining me from? I'd love to know. Please hit me up in the chat, wherever that might be on your browser. I'd love to know where you're joining me from. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take my hat off while we're chatting here together. And I'm just going to sit that up there to keep us company. During this session, on how to make yourself the interview panel's first choice before you even walk into the room. And this is so important, guys, because we are heading into the toughest economic conditions since the Great Depression, and perhaps the worst economic environment that the world has ever seen. And if you want to see some charts that clearly show this, I've pulled up a couple for you. Let's have a look. Here, this is from the USA, but the Australian data looks quite similar. You can see unemployment between the last big recession in 2008-9 and the current economic shock. You can see the jump in unemployment is absolutely enormous. And then the decline in gross national product, which is essentially like the output of the country, you can see has also taken an enormous hit. Now, of course, that decline in production, the decline in the number of jobs that's available, won't affect all industries, and it doesn't mean that every graduate or every early career stage professional is going to be affected by it in terms of finding a job. But today's session isn't about finding a job. Today's session is about you finding and securing your dream job, and that's very, very different. You know, the strategies that you're going to learn in the next half an hour, that's not just about this point in your career. These are strategies that are going to help you throughout your entire career. Interested in getting a promotion? No worries. You want a career change? Yeah, we can do that. Is there a Silicon Valley tech company that you really want to work for? No problem. By the end of this session, you're going to have the strategies and tools to know how to become the interview panel's first choice before you even walk into the room. I'm going to reveal to you how to create a hit list of the jobs, the companies, and the industries that best align with you, and how to make a plan so that you are able to get in front of the right people at the right time to make sure that you land that job every single time. I'm Rob Malicki. I'm one of the co-architects of the New Colombo Plan, and over the last 20 years, I've helped literally thousands of students to build their resumes and to identify their X factor to help get them into the career that they want. But before we go on, there's something that I wanted to ask you. You know how at the end of high school, it's really hard to know what you should do next. You know, there's so much pressure and misinformation, so many biases and agendas of people trying to push young people in a certain direction. Today we're streaming this session via my YouTube channel. It's called A Life That Travels. And the reason that I created this channel was to help young people with that decision by creating reviews and information, interviews, and basically unbiased advice to help make that decision easier. This whole channel is about helping those people with that challenge of trying to decide what comes next. You know, I'm not their mum. I'm not the person to help them to make the decision. All I want to do is to put some unbiased advice out there that will help them with that really critical but really difficult decision that they need to make. You know, this whole channel has been growing 100% organically, and I'm nearly at 5,000 subscribers, as you can probably see down below. So can you please do me a favor? If today I share one piece of advice or one anecdote that you find interesting or funny or helpful or valuable, can you please hit that subscribe button? Firstly, I'd love to get to 5,000 subscribers. But secondly, it just tells YouTube that this is a valuable channel, and together we can help more young people have access to unbiased information and advice at that really difficult decision point in their lives. Thanks heaps. Okay, let's head back to 1931. One of the things that made the Great Depression so difficult, the 1930s so tough, was that America had literally just come off the back of its greatest ever decade of growth and prosperity. The 1920s was called the Roaring Twenties, and for good reason. The economy was literally flying, and then it like flew into a window. Before the economy landed on the floor, Plenty Wingo had been running cafes and restaurants in the town of Abilene in Texas. He worked hard, but it was a pretty good job, and he owned a nice house which he lived in with his wife and daughter, and life was pretty good. The increasing prosperity of the country was leading to more and more people doing these increasingly dramatic stunts to try and gain their fame and fortune. The public was hungry for entertainment. The most notable example of this kind of stunt really was Charles Lindbergh flying from New York to Paris on the first non-stop flight between those two cities. And this catapulted Lindbergh to become a national hero. Another guy rolled a steel hoop from Texas to New York, go figure, but probably the most ridiculous example of the publicity seeking that I could find was a gentleman called Bill Williams. Bill Williams, a local in Colorado, pushed a peanut up Pikes Peak, using his nose. How many days do you reckon it took him? The answer? Yeah, in fact, hit me up in the chat. How many days do you think it took Bill Williams to push a peanut up Pikes Peak with his nose? I'll give you a moment. It took him 22 days to do it. And of course, he was advertising a peanut company. Amidst this craze of publicity-seeking people, I'd like to introduce you to our next characters, and they are Benny and Betty Fox. The 1920s was a decade of dancing. You may have heard of famous dancers like the Charleston, or the Lindy Hop, or the Jitterbug, and the screen was filled with famous performers like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And this was the background from which Benny and Betty Fox came. Except they had a difference in the type of dancing that they did. They were what was known as sky dancers. And if you can picture this, a small metal disc, probably about 50 centimeters across, suspended somewhere between 10 and 30 stories above the street below. And Benny and Betty would perform on top of that metal disc without safety ropes for hours on end. If you look at these photos, it's kind of nuts. Now, Benny came to Abilene, Texas, which was Plenty Wingo's hometown, in 1929 to perform a different kind of stunt, but one that was also just kind of insane. His stunt was to sit on top of the flagpole, on top of the Hilton Hotel in Abilene for 100 hours straight. Now, he had a special seat that he sat on. He wasn't just sitting on the flagpole, because that would be really difficult. But this sent the entire city into overdrive. 10,000 people came out into the streets to see Benny Fox performing his stunts, and advertisements filled the newspapers. I'd like to read you one from the time. Benny would be drinking Weber's root beer, Benny Fox's favourite drink. Up goes Benny Fox, down go the prices at Barrow Furniture. You know what, there was even a guessing competition to see how long he would sleep for after he finished his 100 hours sitting on top of the flagpole. The winner, a lady called Mrs. Gray, guessed 11 hours and 3 minutes. And she was right within 1 minute. He slept for 11 hours and 2 minutes. But he slept in the window, in the shop front window of the Barrow Furniture Company, who was one of his sponsors. So you can imagine, the whole town had gone completely crazy. So it's probably not surprising that amongst this backdrop of people doing stunts, that Plenty had this idea of walking backwards around the world. Because Benny and Betty Fox, they'd made their fortune. So surely doing something even more dramatic couldn't fail in the midst of these terrible, terrible economic times. One of the things that you need to know is that Plenty Wingo had lost his cafes and restaurants, and so the necessity for him to make a living for his family was growing strongly, and hence this idea of walking around the world backwards and gaining his fame and fortune grew and grew and grew on him. But he had some problems, because walking backwards isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do, and he had 3 problems. The first, walking backwards, uses very different muscles. And so what he did to counter that was he trained for 6 months, getting up before dawn and walking 10 miles backwards to get his body used to the process and the feeling of walking like that. The second problem was that humans aren't blessed with eyes in the back of our heads. So he had this problem of how he was actually going to be able to see where he was going, because you can imagine walking alongside a freeway backwards is probably not the safest of activities, right? And like a sign from his God, one day Benny was reading a mail order catalogue and found in it a set of glasses with these funny little wing mirrors on the sides, which allowed him to walk backwards and see where he was going. 2 problems solved. The third problem was how he was going to pay for all of this walking around the world. Because, of course, he had no money and he had no sponsors. So how did he solve that problem? Well, we'll get to that. But for now, let's get on to you. Benny and Betty and Plenty will be joining us throughout, but today's session is about you. So if you have questions and comments as we go, please feel free to drop them in the chat on the side, and I'll be doing a Q&A at the end of this session. So I'll run through those and I'll try to get through to as many questions or comments as I can. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to be giving away a free LinkedIn profile review, one-on-one, to the person who makes the most interesting comment, the funniest comment, the best comment throughout this. So please don't be afraid. I'm here for you, so drop those comments in the side. My question for you is, do you want to be more confident? Do you want to be more focused? Do you want to be more networked? And do you want to be more in demand? If so, it starts right now. There's a 7-step process to take you from wherever you are right now to being at the top of any pile of applications for a job. So let's go through those steps really quickly. The first one is figuring out what exactly it is that you want. Because if you don't know what you want and you don't know where you're heading, chances are you'll probably end up somewhere else. Secondly, is about figuring out who's got what it is that you want, because not all jobs are alike, not all companies are alike, and not all industries are alike. So who's got the characteristics that you're actually chasing? The third thing is to narrow down your professional audience. What do I mean by professional audience? These are the decision makers and the people who are likely to be making the decisions about hiring you down the track. That's your professional audience. Next, you need to align with that audience, because it's one thing to know who the company is, it's another thing to know who the people are, and it's another to have the skills to be there. But if you're not aligned, if you haven't got what they want and they haven't got what you want, it's not going to be a great match. The next thing is to create some content that is specific to that audience, and we're going to get right into the details of that. You then need to continue to build your network and your audience in order to get more reach and get that content in front of the right people. And finally, it's about executing. How do you make sure that the right people are seeing your content at the right time? All right, let's do a case study. I'm going to give you a real life example of where this method has been deployed and has worked. And it looks like this. It's late on a Friday afternoon and you're looking around some job sites, just like hundreds of thousands of other people who are currently looking for a position. And then, out of the blue, there it is. It's your dream job. You've got the skills for it. You've got the experience. It's in a company that you know and love. They sell a product that you love and you're familiar with. I mean, you are a shoo-in for this job. You spend the whole weekend working on your application. You do your resume. You do your LinkedIn profile. You spend plenty of time working on your cover letter to customize it so you can demonstrate just how perfect you are for this role. On Monday morning, you go back to the job site to submit your application. And you discover that 200 people have already applied for the position. That's 200 people in 3 days. What do you do about that? Now, there's something else you need to consider here. Yes, you and 200 other people have already applied for this job. But on the other side of that equation, there's a recruiter or somebody in that company who in 3 days has just received 200 job applications. How can that person, the recruiter, the company, just look through all of those and be 100% sure that they've got the right person? And for you, how can you cut through that noise to make sure that you're sitting on top of the pile? I'm going to show you exactly how. Check this out. This is Amanda.
Hello.
Amanda is applying for a job at Asana.
I'm so excited for this opportunity.
Amanda is a ninja, but not any old sort of ninja. She is an organizational ninja. And that's why Amanda loves Asana. In fact, Amanda is one of Asana's #1 fans.
Don't worry, I'm not one of those weird, freaky kind of fans.
Amanda breathes Asana. Amanda eats Asana. Amanda even dreams Asana.
Her mind is the perfect feature.
In fact, Amanda even thinks about Asana on the toilet.
That's too far.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Amanda is a true fan because she's harnessed the power of Asana to fully coordinate a workplace. She's managed staff onboarding and benefits. She's organised events.
But the thing I've enjoyed the most is organising our team's traditions and celebrations.
Most importantly though, Amanda is used to keeping an office running smoothly by wearing many hats.
Is this really necessary?
You see, Amanda has won awards for her work.
But awards aren't what's important. People are important.
And she's kept our team on track by organising our insights.
Insights. Because we do them in-house rather than off-site. Get it?
And management advances.
Because companies should never retreat.
And she's made sure that everyone takes the time to organise their day to work as effectively as possible, as well as never lose sight of the big picture.
Ta-da!
Not only is Amanda a rare find,
I would never say that.
but she's also incredibly humble.
I wouldn't say that either.
She's empathetic, energetic, and a fan of everything that makes work more fun and more effective. The truth is this, Amanda is Asana's best choice for a workplace coordinator. You will not find anyone more passionate about the mission or more committed to the people.
This is going to be awesome. Let's do it.
Oh, it's awesome, isn't it? So Amanda was one of my former staff members at AIM Overseas. AIM Overseas was the first company I founded with my wife 13 years ago. And up until a couple of months ago, it was a $5.5 million turnover business, 13 years, 13 odd staff, thousands of students taking programs, and vaporized in literally a couple of days because of coronavirus. But one of the things that I really believe in is that, you know, you've got to do everything to look after your staff. So when we had to close the business, I really wanted to help our staff members in their job hunt as much as I possibly could. And so when Amanda showed me the job ad for Asana, I was like, Amanda, this is you. Like, this is the perfect job for you. We really have to go all out to try and get you in front of these guys. And so we used this method. And it basically went like this. Like, I spent a couple of hours scripting that piece of work, as you see. Amanda probably spent 2/3 of a day, maybe a full day, filming the various clips. And then I spent another couple of hours editing it together, etc. I had a video editor who actually went over and like did some of the touching up at the very end. Total input of work, maybe about 2 to 3 days max of human time to make that video. And the result? Well, just a couple of days ago, Amanda signed her contract with Asana and got the job. Okay, amazing, right? You know, great staff member gets a job that suits them well, but what's the chance that that would have happened on its own? You know, literally there were hundreds of applications for that job, you know, a pile of applications for that job. So without any extra pushing, what's the chance of like getting through, cutting through the noise and getting to the top of the pile? 1 in 10, 1 in 20, maybe 1 in 50. I don't know what the statistics are, but what I do know is the reality of recruiting, because we've hired plenty of staff in the past. And recruitment, you know, it's a tough thing when you're on the other side of that coin. And for those who've never done it before, it's a side that you don't ever see. Firstly, you get tons of applications. They come in by email, they come in documents, you get heaps and heaps of paper that you need to read. In this case, like literally hundreds of applications that this a recruiter or people inside the company would have had to read through. Hundreds and hundreds. That's a really, even if you love your job, that's a really kind of long, boring process. On the other side of, you know, you also get not just lots of applications, but you get applications that aren't necessarily well written. Tons of people don't bother to customize their cover letters. So do you know if that's really the perfect person for the job? It could be. Maybe their resume is great, but they haven't customized the letter. It can be a really bureaucratic process. So particularly in large organizations, it can take weeks, sometimes months, for jobs to be approved and advertised and the recruitment to happen, the person to get the job, even though the position needed to be filled yesterday because it's so freaking busy. So recruitment is a really manual, repetitive, sometimes boring process that you have to go through. So here's the question. Somebody's sitting, or people are sitting, going through tons of applications, and it's not necessarily a very engaging process. How do you reach out and grab them to make sure that they pay attention to your application? And there's 2 factors of psychology that I'd like to talk about, which are the key reasons why this particular piece of content and why your content will cut through. The first one is called mental availability. Mental availability is that moment where you're walking through the supermarket and you get to the tomato sauce section and you want to buy tomato sauce. And in front of you, there are like 10 different brands of tomato sauce, but they all kind of look the same. They all have the same label, the same colored bottle. The bottles are all the same sort of size. You know that the flavor is pretty much the same. How are you going to decide which flavor of tomato sauce, or which brand of tomato sauce you're actually going to buy? what happens in that moment is that our brains go back through into our memories to try and retrieve the most available information that we have. So what's available? An experience. If we've had a great experience with a particular brand of tomato sauce, somewhere in the back of our minds, that's hidden away. Marketing, branding, advertising, these things are very, very powerful because when we go back, we retrieve the most recent advertisements that we've seen. And if in the absence of other information, chances are we're going to grab hold of that information and say, okay, I'm going to grab the Heinz tomato sauce today because that's the ad that I saw most recently. You know, these days we are constantly switching between media. We switch between media, that's our phone, talking to someone, the internet, the computer, 27 times an hour when we're at work. And scientists have proven that our attention span is now only 8 seconds long. We've got a shorter attention span than a goldfish. So we need to make sure that we are as mentally available for recruiters as possible. Because, and this is an interesting one too, the more that we see something, the more that we are exposed to something, the more we are likely to trust it and to choose it, even if we don't like it. All right? The more we are exposed to something, the more that we see something, the more we are likely to choose it and to trust it, even if we don't like it. That is the power of mental availability. Next is a psychological phenomenon very well studied, which is called a confirmation bias. Confirmation biases is where we're exposed to some information, for example, in this case, like Amanda's video, before Amanda shows up for the interview. And when Amanda actually shows up for the interview and we're asking her questions, things that she says confirms a view that we already formed when we watched that initial video. So let's take an example. In the video, you would have seen Amanda say that she lives asana and breathes asana and even eats asana, and that she's very organized and that she's very organized and that she has great values and that she's won awards. Now, in an interview situation, if we ask questions and Amanda mentions those things, that shows us that she's consistent with what we've seen before. So it confirms a view that we already have. But let's say in the interview, it turns out that Amanda tells us something like, oh, I never washed my dishes at the office because, well, I thought it was below me and I didn't think that I should have to wash the dishes. Most likely, we would choose not to place as much value on that information because it's brand new. It's something that we haven't been exposed to. Why is content so important? It allows us to create a view of ourselves that other people will see, but that's a view, an impression that we get to control. Over in the interview, these people are asking us questions. We don't necessarily get to control that outcome unless we have primed that interview situation with some content, thus creating the possibility of creating a confirmation bias. Now let's revisit our characters, Plenty Wingo and Benny and Betty Fox, and think about this in the context of mental availability. Benny and Betty would go to a town and they would have lots of advertising. They would work with advertisers, newspaper editors to create some buzz around their event. There was lots of mental availability, and of course this was very powerful because it allowed advertisers to sell products, but it also allowed Benny and Betty to build their brand and to build people's excitement to go and see them. This increased their value. Plenty, on the other hand, had originally planned to have a fixer kind of go in front of him, at least for the first part of his journey, to like prime a town, so to go and look for advertising opportunities and PR opportunities. But unfortunately, that fell through. What did Plenty do? Well, he left anyway, right? He headed off on his trip without priming his audience in advance. As a result, when he entered a new town, he would often be able to get some publicity. A newspaper would become interested in this guy walking backwards through town. Fantastic. And maybe there would be an article in the newspaper, some people would read that and possibly bump into him on the street. But he was just passing through a town. And so the opportunity for somebody to build the mental availability, get excited about going to see him, and then perhaps sponsoring his endeavour was far, far more limited than with Betty and Benny Fox. Okay, now let's talk about you and how you can execute on this checklist. But before we do that, do you mind if I take my jacket off, because there's like lights all over the place and it's getting like really warm here, so before this goes too far and start sweating up here, that wouldn't be pleasant. Let's put this up here. All right. Okay, let's talk about you. This is about you winning your dream job. Is that worth a little bit of effort? Yeah, I reckon that's worth a little bit of effort and some work. And that's important because this doesn't just come without doing any work. There is definitely some work involved, but you will absolutely reap the rewards. The first thing is for us to think about our goals. I've sent you through a worksheet that's going to help us work through what some of your goals are. As we started off saying, if you don't know where you're going, you're probably going to end up somewhere else. The most important thing about goals is that once we set them, we always have them in the back of our minds. And that, whether we realize it or not, helps us to make decisions that take us in the right direction. It's a bit like when we're driving a car. Our hands will follow where our eyes go. So if you're looking far off to the horizon and you're looking where you want to go, our hands will literally just steer us in the right direction most of the time. Now let's say you're thrown into a situation where something happens that you're not expecting in the car. If your eyes focus on the tree on the side of the road, your hands are automatically going to turn you towards the direction that your eyes are facing. And this is very much what goal setting is like. When we set big picture goals about the kind of career that we want to have, or the kind of company that we want to work for, or the kind of industry or job that we want to have, when we've set that as a goal, subtle things might come up that otherwise we wouldn't pay attention to. Like you meet somebody at a bar who happens to work in the relevant industry and, well, they weren't maybe the most captivating person right out of the gate, but because we've set a goal in the back of our minds, we're like, oh, this is interesting. You may have something that is of interest to me, and it leaves us space to explore that. But if you don't have a goal, you might just be like, you haven't captivated me straight away, so I'm not going to engage any further. Let's work through the first part of the worksheet. The very first question here is asking you what sort of things you want to get out of your career. Now, some people, you might be very lucky and you might know exactly what you already want out of your career. Fantastic. It's always really good to write that down and also to share that with other people. Psychologists have found that if you set a goal and share it with somebody else, you're 33% more likely to actually achieve that goal. Once you've had a chance to think about what some of your goals might be, we also want to think about what sort of things that you expect out of a workplace. So these things can be linked, your goals and what you expect from a workplace. On the worksheet, you'll see that there's a whole list of different attributes that a company might have. So for example, it's really well paid, it's close to home, good work-life balance, maybe it's a NGO organization, maybe it has the opportunity to meet a lot of people. You want to choose a limited number of the things that are most important to you. Okay, this allows us to start narrowing things down. So if we know what our professional goals are and we start to decide what kind of organization we would like to work in, we're starting to narrow this down from like every organization under the sun down to, for example, specific industries, perhaps specific companies, and if we're really lucky, even specific jobs. On the second page of the worksheet, you'll see that we can now start to identify what those organizations are. So we start at the very top by setting some career goals, by looking at what sort of organisations or characteristics of organisations we'd like to work for, and then starting to narrow that down to industries, companies, or jobs. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that you can just get done in 1 or 2 minutes. It might take you some time to sit down and research, but remember, this is about you getting your ideal job. Is that worth the time to sit down and work out? We've now ascertained some of the things that are important to you, but work is very much a two-sided equation. There's you and there's the organisation that you will work for. So what's important for them? What are their values? What are their products? What are they hoping to achieve? What's their mission? These things are really important for you to understand, because when we get to the next step, which is creating content that meets or that matches up and lines up, we need to know about the industry, the organisations, the jobs that we're hoping to get into. Because if you think about mental availability and confirmation, what we need to show is that we understand the organisations, the industries that we're trying to get into. So you've made your plan, you've worked out what kind of characteristics of organisations, you've maybe identified some companies, industries you want to get into. Now we want to dig deeper and we want to find out what is unique about that organisation. What are their values, their mission, their products, etc. So we've done some thinking about what's important to us. And our last step is to think about those companies, industries, jobs, and their values, what's important to them, their mission. How does that align with us? If it's an organisation that has got a really good, valuable mission, but the staff there aren't necessarily very well paid, and for you, like being really well paid is critically important, we got like a mismatch there, haven't we? A complete misalignment, and that's not going to work. So what we need to do is to go back and look at our goals and what's important to us and make sure that that aligns with the mission and the products, etc., from those companies or industries. It's a bit like if environmental activism or looking after the environment is important to you, and you went to work for a big mining company that just happened to blow up a 46,000-year-old Aboriginal site. That ain't gonna work, right? So think very carefully about what's important to you and what those companies, organisations, industries, jobs might offer, and make sure that they connect. Okay, so we've worked out what companies or industries or jobs are really well aligned with us. These form what I call your professional audience. These are the people that you want to get in front of and that you want to know about you and to understand the value that you can bring for them. This is your professional audience, and we're going to talk more about this audience. Let's talk briefly about alignment here. Alignment is a bit like rowers rowing in a boat. If everybody is rowing at the same time, you get to go where you want to go much faster. You're going to get there cleanly, you're more likely to head in the right direction and actually reach your destination, and it to be a nice ride. If everybody's rowing at a different rate and in a different direction and pace, your boat's going to go everywhere and it's going to be an unpleasant experience for everyone. So this is why alignment is so important. The companies, the jobs, the industries that you should be looking at need to align very well with your professional goals, with your values, with the things that you want to get out of work. But the other side of the coin is equally true. It's important for the things that are in, your values, etc., your skills, to align with the companies and the jobs and the industries that you want to work in. So we need to think about the skills that we have and what our gaps are. So the next exercise on the worksheet is for you to think about those industries above, the companies, the jobs. Do you have the skills and the experience right now to actually fulfill their needs? And you'll remember that we've already thought about, as part of that first exercise, what is valuable to them? What is their mission? What are their products? What are things that are important to those organisations? So here you can match up what you know about yourself and what that particular organization or industry requires, and you can see if you have a gap. Now, this is the time not to have an ego, all right? Because it's so common that you see in a job advertisement, this person needs, the successful candidate will be an exceptional team player. And then on the other hand, must be able to work independently without guidance. What? Like, the people who write these job ads, for the most part, it's like a wish list. It's like the people that want somebody that's got 10 years of experience but are only going to pay an entry level salary. Like, that just don't work out very well. So you really need to be honest with yourself about what skills and experience you have that align, that match with that industry or job or company that you might actually want to work for. Once you know what those gaps are, you can do something about it. So go out there and take the time to actually get the skills, the experience you need to position yourself with that company, job, or industry. All right, so we're looking at what our gaps are. And when we're looking at our gaps, we can't have an ego because we really need to be honest with ourselves. But then on the other side of that is what your key strengths and selling points are. And now is not a time to be modest. When we think about what our key strengths and selling points are, we don't want to be modest about those. We really want to make those shine. So we want to think about, like, are you somebody who is super organized? Fantastic. You should bring that to the fore. But if you're somebody who's super organized and you like to have really clear instructions, you can't be also saying, on the other hand, oh no, but like, I love to, come up with solutions all by myself, when really you like strong guidance. That's just not being honest. And unfortunately, once you get out into the working world, that misalignment just becomes glaringly obvious, and it's not pleasant for you, and it's definitely not pleasant for the companies either. So think about what your core skills and strengths are. Once we have all of these pieces, now we can think about how you align for the company or the industry or even the job that you're interested in getting into. So if we go back up to the top and we look and say, okay, here's the company that I want to go and work for. This is like their mission. Here are their values. Here's their product and the people that they serve. I know what my gaps are. I'm going to go and work on those. I know what my core skills are, and I can see how they align with this company up here. Now we can actually start to say, this is the value that I can generate for the company, for this industry, or in this particular job. And so right down in the bottom section of that worksheet, we can really dive into detail about the value that you will bring for a particular company. Okay, so let's think now about Benny and Plenty and Betty and how they work their professional audiences, the nature of their professional audiences. Plenty's audience, he was hoping to have this enormous audience where he would reach people all over America and he would captivate people, this enormous audience, with his audacious plan. But of course, that's incredibly difficult. Benny and Betty had a different approach. They worked on a local level. They got to know newspaper editors. They would generate lots of mental availability and in a local audience to come to a local location to watch a local act. It was very specific for the lives and activities of the people in that town. And that becomes very powerful when you really want to gain traction, is being very specific. And that specificity is something we'll talk about in this next section, which is all about developing content. So content is everything that we put out into the world. It could be like your personal Instagram posts, it could be articles that you write. Anything that we put out there is content. And the powerful thing about content is it allows us, as we saw with that piece of content, Amanda, and a video for her potential employer, it allows people to form an opinion about us before we actually walk into the interview room. So we should be very deliberate about the content that we put out. We've worked out our plan. We know what we want to achieve in terms of career goals. We've found companies that align with us. We know how we align with those companies. Now we can create content that we can get in front of our professional audience to make sure that they know about us. This is critical because it becomes like a magnet. You know what you want. You know the people you are targeting, and it's like you're reaching out to them. And on the other side, they only need to find you, and it's going to work. They're going to engage with you and engage with that content, and that starts to build that mental availability and build your personal brand. And this is how you just cut straight from the bottom of the pile right to the top every single time. There's a reason why content is so powerful when it comes to this whole process of winning your dream job. And that's because it allows us to leverage the factors of influence and persuasion. So Robert Cialdini wrote a really great book on building influence and persuading people back in the early 80s, and it's still like a defining book on the subject. So let's dive in to the individual factors of influence and persuasion and talk about how we can create content that creates that mental availability and persuades people that we really are the right person for the job. The first factor of influence is reciprocity. You know, humans have evolved in a way that we want, when we give somebody something, we kind of expect something in return. And when somebody gives us something, we kind of feel like we owe them something. I saw this great example down at my local shopping mall a few months ago. It was outside like the supermarket, and there was a home loan company that had set up a table, and there was a lady there that had a cup of fresh coffee in her hand, you know, hot takeaway coffee. And she was profiling people as they came past, and she targeted like a young mother with a screaming toddler, dragging him along. And I saw her like go over with the cup of coffee and be like, "Hey, would you like a cup of coffee?" And of course, the mother took the cup of coffee because she's not thinking straight, she's tired, she's got the screaming kid, and all she wants is a freaking coffee to survive. And the moment she's taken that coffee, she's invoked reciprocity. And then the seller from the home loan company says, "Oh, have you got a minute? I'd just like to talk to you about our home loan product." Because that mum had taken that cup of coffee, she then feels obliged to give a minute in return. Reciprocity is powerful when it comes to content, because if you create a fantastic piece of content that gives some value for your professional audience, they're going to feel like they want to repay it in some way. Reciprocity is the first factor of influence and persuasion. The next one is social proof. You can imagine humans evolved in the forest and out on the plains, and we basically learned by following others. So following the example of others, following the social proof of others, is hardwired into our brains. And so when we can invoke things like testimonials and etc., we're more likely to persuade people to believe in what we're doing. Don't eat the mushroom, okay? Just don't eat the freaking mushroom. Next is liking. We are more likely to be persuaded by people that we like. So content allows us to leverage liking by letting people know the things that we believe in, the things that we like, the characteristics of us. So for example, if in a piece of content I talk about my dog, even if it's a professional article and I use an example of my dog, it shows people that I'm a dog person. I'm also a cat person too, but there you go. Like, I'm a dog person. And so that person suddenly goes, "Oh, they're a dog person. They're kind of like me. I like that." We like to do business with people who like us and people who are like us. So your content allows you to curate the characteristics of yourself that you want people to know about. Scarcity. Scarcity is the next factor, and humans have an innate fear of loss. We don't like to miss out on things. So when you create content, it actually allows people to see you as being somebody particularly valuable, somebody that, you have something that might be of use to that particular company. So let's say that you're an electrical engineer and you're writing about a very specific problem, a solution to a very specific problem. You're demonstrating that you have knowledge and skills and experience that is really niche in terms of solving the problem of that company. And that makes you more valuable because you are scarce. After scarcity, we have commitment and consistency. We like to stick to what we already know. The brand of sauce that we've already picked off the shelf, chances are once we've taken one brand of tomato sauce, we're likely to go back to that again because we have that mental availability and we have that confirmation that this is something that I choose and I want to be consistent with that. And this is the same if, for example, in a piece of content, we talk about our values, the things that are important to us. An employer, somebody who reads that, somebody in your audience that reads that article or sees that video or sees that, Instagram post, if what you present is consistent with what they want, we've already identified what those industries, organizations, jobs, what's valuable to them. If you present that to them, it's consistent and that becomes far more persuasive for them. The next is authority. And we're persuaded by authoritative figures. Now, this is very manipulatable, for example, with body language and with the way we dress. So we're more likely to see people wearing uniforms as authoritative figures, even if it's not a real uniform. Nurses, people wearing business suits, we're more likely to find authoritative and we're more likely to believe them and trust them. If you're wearing a large watch, psychologists have found that people think that you're smarter. Think that you're more powerful. If you're wearing glasses, they think that you're smarter, and the bigger the glasses, the smarter people think that you are. There's a fantastic book which is called The Definitive Book of Body Language. And if you're interested in how you can dress so that people think that you're more authoritative, I definitely recommend that you buy that book. But content is important because that allows us to set ourselves up as the subject matter expert on a particular topic. And if we've already done the work to identify what's important to that company or job, we create a piece of content around it, the people in your audience go, oh, hey, this person over here, they're an authority. They know what they're talking about. They can solve my problem. And so when you go to apply for a job, boom, you can show that you are able to solve the specific problems or live up to the values that that company has. Authority is very, very powerful. Finally, there's one last factor, and that's being part of the tribe. If we've got a friend who's recommending we do one thing, and we've got a close family member who's recommending we do something else, which piece of advice are we likely to take? You're likely to take the advice of your tribe. So in terms of us building our profile and making sure that we're able to identify ourselves as being part of the tribe of the companies and the industries that we want to get ourselves jobs in, how do you do that? Join the industry association. Make sure that you're building a network inside that industry or even within that company, and it will identify you as being part of the tribe. So a great way that we can leverage content to this end is by writing an article for our industry association. Then people will see that we're part of their tribe and they're much more likely to be influenced and persuaded when we apply for a job with them. Okay, let's now talk about creating content, because a lot of people think like, oh, I'm not a content creator, like I can't do video, or I'm not a good writer, or whatever it might be. But the reality is this, is that we're all content creators. Everyone takes photographs. Heaps of people are on Instagram. Lots of people like to write. Even phone calls is a form of content. Audio. So we need to stick within our zone of comfort. If you're a fantastic writer, don't try and make videos if you're not comfortable doing it. If you're awesome at video, you don't have to necessarily be a fantastic writer in order to create great content. Maybe you're a designer and you're really good at summarizing things and you can create infographics. Great, then that's what you should do. Because if you focus on the area that you're most comfortable, chances are you're not going to push yourself outside your comfort zone, and the quality of your content is going to be better. So don't try to be what you're not. Focus on creating content that you enjoy making. So there's a bunch of different types of content that you can make. Write an article. You can then publish that in lots of different places. You could make a video. You could make an infographic. I've also sent you through a worksheet that's got lots of different types of content. Even TikTok is content, right? And you could use that, you could leverage that to create content that is relevant to your industry and the people that you want to reach. So there is no such thing as the wrong type of content. You just want to do something which you're comfortable with. One of my favorite things to do is to not create new content at all. But let's say that there's a company that you really want to work for that puts out, white papers or is regularly publishing on Instagram or LinkedIn. You can take their content and you can create a sub piece of content that points back to it. So if it's a white paper that they've released, you could write a little summary of it, which you post to LinkedIn, and that you tag them in. Or if the best example of this, I must say, is a guy on Instagram called Kirby Jenner. He's got an Instagram profile, and the only person he follows is the real Jenner, and he just photoshops himself into images that she's put out, and it's hilarious, and they follow him. So he is able to stick within his zone of specialty, which is Photoshop and imagery, and he's able to get himself on the radar of some of the most pop famous people in the entire world, just by creating content which is relevant and within his zone of strength. Now with content, imagery is everything. So let's think about Benny and Betty versus Plenty. Benny and Betty were always showing up. They showed up in different cities, they showed up at country fairs, they were always showing up and delivering content that was localized and very consumable, time limited, easy to engage with. Plenty, on the other hand, was walking backwards around the world in a time of financial devastation. Possibly not the best imagery to be portraying when things are really tough, that we're going backwards. Maybe walking forwards would have attracted more attention. It seems like a fine difference, but psychology is about fine differences. If we see something like somebody walking backwards, somewhere in the back of our minds we go, oh, I don't want to go backwards right now. Times are really tough. And we're less likely to be influenced and persuaded by that. So imagery is very important. Always focus on the positives and being specific as much as we can. All right, is this useful? If it's useful, please hit me up in the comments and let me know what you're interested in. Let me know if you have any questions. The other thing, guys, is that at the end of this, there's so much details in here and we can break this down so much more. We're not going to get through it into heaps of details in an hour-long session. So I'm actually going to be creating a dedicated resource around this, and I'll tell you a bit more about that at the end, but I'll give you guys access to that as well. If it has been valuable, just please remember to hit the subscribe button down below. That really helps me, and it's going to help so many more young Australians figure out what's the next right step for them. All right, let's now just have a quick summary. So we've talked about the different kinds of things that are important to you in terms of the career you're hoping to develop, the companies and their attributes, the things that are valuable to you in those companies, how you align with those companies, how what your professional audience is, and how to identify your gaps and how to identify your superpowers to make sure that you align with those companies. We've covered a lot so far, as well as creating content that will be relevant to that organization. The last piece in this is making sure that we're connected with the right people who need to see that content, the right people in the professional audience that we're trying to reach. So how do we reach the right people? Well, if you've identified the industries even companies that you're interested in potentially working with, or organizations, sorry, not necessarily a company, you've identified those organizations, you can start to look up the people who work there on LinkedIn. I mean, this is a resource that's like a gold mine that people before our generation simply did not have access to. Now we can look up the exact people who are in our professional audience. So go do that, right? Go do that. There's a tip though. I get like tons of LinkedIn connection requests. And here I've got an example of one which is really crap. It's like somebody who's reaching out to sell me something, and I'm not interested in this kind of request at all. I get these every single day, people being like, oh, hey Rob, I see that, we've got so many things in common, i.e. they're trying to invoke a little bit of liking. We see so much stuff in common, but by the way, I'd like to sell you this software product. Maybe I can help your company to improve its software setup. Yeah, I had to close my company a couple of months ago because of coronavirus. Thanks a lot. So you need to be making sure you're not just reaching out to anyone and everyone. And in particular, you ain't going to be reaching A-listers, right? Like, don't go reaching out to CEOs. Richard Branson, I'm sorry, he's not going to reply to your email, and neither is Oprah Winfrey or any of the other kind of A-list contacts. They're too busy. But if you go down a level, you go to people who are like senior managers, even directors, people who are working in their B-listers and C-listers, I like to call them. Those people will often reply if you can deliver them some value. Now, let me give you an example from my own LinkedIn experience of one that really works. And I reached out to him and he was happy for me to share it. His name is James Hunt. He's the MBA coordinator at the University of Newcastle. A few years ago, I did a review video on this A Life That Travels channel of the University of Newcastle, and James reached out to connect with me on LinkedIn. And here's the message that he put up. It's basically like, Rob, I love the work that you do. Next time that you come to Newcastle, let me help you. I'll try and get you in front of the Vice Chancellor, I'll show you around the building, I'll help you to create better content. Now, I've never met James, but I'm like, wow, this guy is pretty cool. He's reaching out to try and help me. So did I accept his request? Absolutely. And now every time I post something on LinkedIn, James and I have a little bit of a banter. So we're making a meaningful connection because he started off by giving me some genuine value and then following it up by continuing to offer meaningful interaction. The worst thing you can do on LinkedIn is just go out and connect with like 1,000 people. And what? Like, that's not helpful to anybody. You need to be specific and you need to add value. So the fact that you have access to this incredible network is amazing. Be specific and methodical about who you're going to reach out to. Okay, so we want to remember why this works. Mental availability. The more often somebody sees us and hears from us, the more likely they are going to trust us. And then that also leverages all of those wonderful aspects of psychology, reciprocity, authority, etc., liking. And then confirmation bias, that making sure that if we demonstrate that we have an expertise in something, if we go into an interview or we submit a job application, this then allows the person reading that application to simply confirm, oh yes, I already know something about them and this application is consistent with that and therefore has more weight. So this is why content works so wonderfully well. The final step in all of this is making sure we get it all out into the world. I've given you guys a worksheet that allows you to plan your content. So on the front side of that worksheet, it talks about the different types of content you can create and gives you an opportunity to think about what your content development strengths might be. On the reverse side is the content planner. And this is where we get to bring everything together, okay? Our goals and mission and value and those of the company and how it all aligns and the professional audience, the network that we've created. It all comes down to creating a piece of content that speaks to the people that we want to reach. So firstly, what is that piece of content going to be? Is it going to be an article? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a series of Instagram posts? Is it going to be a TikTok? I don't know. That's up to you. Secondly, what's the value that's going to bring for the audience that you're hoping to reach? And what's the value that you're hoping that brings back to you in total? So if you put out a summary of a white paper written by a company, what are you hoping to get out of that? Are you hoping to connect with some people on LinkedIn? Are you hoping to get some media attention? These are things that you should think about before you even create the piece of content. And the fourth step is working out how you're going to get it in front of those people. Now, we are so lucky these days because there are so many different ways for us to publish content. Here's an example from 2011 during the last financial crisis when Ireland was in dire trouble. And this was before social media had the reach that it currently has. And an Irishman actually bought a billboard on the main freeway heading into Dublin and put up this huge billboard for £2,000 saying that he didn't want to immigrate and he wanted a job in Ireland. He ended up getting a whole bunch of interviews and scored a job because he was audacious enough to create a piece of content to get attention and to tell people what he stood for. He didn't want to immigrate. He believed in Ireland. He wanted to stay in Ireland and he got the job. Now, fortunately for us, we don't have to do anything quite so crazy as buying a billboard anymore. There are easier and cheaper ways to do it. Now, the first is, of course, for us to publish in all the places that we have access to. We can publish on LinkedIn, on social media, we can write for sites like Medium, we can approach all sorts of different industry publications. There are scores of places where you can go to publish your content, whether it's a written or a video, whether it's an infographic, lots of places you can go. But I'm going to give you a couple of don't tell anybody ninja tricks. The first one is called LinkedIn advertising. So after I helped Amanda to produce the video for Asana, I posted it on LinkedIn and I went into LinkedIn's advertising engine and set up a $10 advertising campaign, which I targeted to people working inside Asana. That video had something like 500 views on YouTube and about 600 views through LinkedIn. It reached every single person, maybe not every single person, but a huge percentage of the people who work inside Asana. And of course, they think that that is as cool as heck because they've never seen anything like that before. And here it is being served to them in their own feed, and it's directly relevant to them. The content is relevant to them. It's about them. Completely enchanting, and it cost $10. When I got called by a lady at Asana to do Amanda's reference checks, she said, "So, would you recommend Amanda to work at Asana?" I was like, heck yeah. I said to her, "Did you see the video?" And she said, "Oh yeah, the famous video," were her words, the famous video. For $10 and 2 or 3 days of work, that video was famous inside that company. How could they not hire her at the end of the day? Now, of course, she's got the relevant skills and experience, and that's very important. How could they not hire her when everybody in the company had seen that video? It's incredibly powerful. The second ninja trick is to have somebody else talk about you. Okay, so not you reaching out, but somebody else reaching out to a company that you want to get into, ostensibly on your behalf or without your knowledge. I had another staff member that had found a job that they really, really wanted. And they'd already been talking about this company. I'd heard them talking about this company inside our office before we had to close the office. And when I found out that she was applying for this job at this company that she loved, because our company had closed, the first thing I did was send an email to the general manager of that company. And I said, "Hey, look, I know that my staff member has applied for this job with you. She doesn't know that I'm sending this email," which she didn't, but I just wanted to tell you that she's raved about you guys. She loves what you stand for. She loves your product. And here are all of her strengths. And of course, I looked up the job ad to make sure that the strengths I identified aligned with the job ad. Here are all of the strengths and why she'd be a great employee for you. You really should hire her. So that comes with so much more imprimatur because it's come from a third party who's giving a positive reference on your behalf. So you don't have to deliver the message. you could actually get people that you know to deliver the message. One of the tricks on social media is, for example, if you've written a great article and you hit share and share it to other people, you get one of your friends to hit the share button and them to share it back to the company in question or the organization in question. So it hasn't just been you like pitching it directly to them, but you've kind of come in through the side door, and it's a lot more persuasive for people to get that content like secondhand. So that's also a fantastic little ninja trick for you. Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure that there are some really great actionable tips and tactics and strategies in here that you're going to be able to use. So that's it from me. Goodbye. You'd kill me if I didn't tell you the end of like the Plenty walking around the world story, wouldn't you? So I'm not going to do that. Okay, let me tell you the end of the story for both Plenty and Benny and Betty Fox. Plenty ended up walking backwards all the way across America to New York. He managed to somehow wrangle his way onto a boat to Hamburg in Germany, and then he walked backwards all the way from Hamburg to the Turkish border, through Eastern Europe, etc., etc. It was a long walk. When he got to when he got down to Turkey, he didn't have a visa because he hadn't done the pre-planning of his trip. He got arrested and thrown in jail. The story gets a little bit murky as to how he then managed to not only get out of jail, but then get back to America. There's some insinuation that maybe he did a drug run. It was a drug mule bringing a shipment into Western Europe, unconfirmed. Managed to get back to America, hitched a ride to Los Angeles on the West Coast, and then walked backwards from Los Angeles all the way to Texas, where he finished his trip. So he completed his journey. He didn't get to do exactly what he said he was heading out to do. The US consul general in Turkey refused to grant him a visa to go through further to the east through places like Pakistan and Afghanistan in order for him to continue his journey around the world. But he'd kind of done what he set out to achieve, which was to walk a bloody long way, 13,000 kilometers, even though he didn't manage to like become enormously famous. He arrived back in Texas with $4 in his pocket, so hardly his fame and fortune. Yes, he'd lived a great adventure. He'd thrown a big right hook, trying to make the big time, and he kind of missed. Had a great adventure, ended up living out quite a modest life, trying to take advantage of the stunt that he'd done, this huge adventure, and get some publicity from it over the years. He eventually published a book, but that was kind of it. Benny and Betty Fox, on the other hand, they kind of continued to grow bigger and bigger. They did a tour to South America, to Canada, to Cuba. They managed to run shows. They made lots of money. There was actually a Warner Brothers film made about them, which was called Sky Dancers, I believe. They actually managed to live out a really successful life and career. So what's the difference between Plenty and Benny and Betty Fox? Well, so much of it has got to do with the nature of the content, the nature of the stunt or stunts that they were pulling. Plenty went all out. He went for the big one that he was hoping to get massive attention, but his audience was too diffuse. He wasn't able to hone in on his audience and deliver them exactly what they wanted. And it was one big piece. It was all or nothing. Whereas Benny and Betty continued to chip away, building their personal brands, building their brands bit by doing lots of little activities that were highly specific, catered to their audience, delivered value, that advertisers could get behind and endorse, and they grew their network, newspaper editors and influential people across the country, which helped build their value. So yes, you can go for the all-out piece of content, but most important is for you just to continue to chip away at building that brand as you go. Because that is what's going to take you from the bottom of the pile, or just one application in the pile, to the very top. And that's what's going to help you to get the job before you even walk into the interview room. There have been a whole bunch of really actionable tips and tactics and strategies in this session, but of course that's been a lot to digest over the last period that we've been talking. And so I'd like to make this content on demand for you so you can come back and watch it again. So if you found this valuable, I would really like to provide that extra value to you by making this available to you after the session. But of course, nothing is completely free, so I'd like to do something reciprocal with you. And that's if you found some value from this, what I would really love and what would be super helpful for me is if you could leave me a testimonial. And what you can do is click on the link in the chat right there. It'll take you to a form. If you leave me a short testimonial about your experience in this session, what you've enjoyed, the value that it has given to you, then I will reciprocate that by giving you access to this session and these resources afterwards, so you can continue to work on your personal brand into the future. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm now going to do a Q&A, so any questions you have, pop them in the chat and I will answer them. Take care.